Playing older games is such a minefield. What original hardware wins in terms of authenticity, it loses in having to devote yourself and an increasingly large portion of your living space and/or income to collecting. Official re-releases and ports often add amazing quality of life enhancements and glaringly ridiculous downgrades, seeming more like expensive trinkets aimed at nostalgia backlogs rather than truly definitive versions of the experience. For my money, which is none, community-driven emulation is the way to go. The amount of passion that goes into providing as many options and features to people who want to play older games evokes the golden experience. Though recently my favourite game seems to be Graphics Settings Simulator. I'm fresh from finishing Metal Gear Solid, and where I'd normally jab it with a 4K settings cocktail without understanding its effects, this possesses neither power nor screen to do that. So I played on native, and something about the ridiculous jaggedness of the wobbling polygons felt more glove-snug than the semi-remake, unnerving cleanliness my eyeballs usually frequent. When I think about it logically, rendering at higher internal resolutions, which I will mistakenly call upscaling for brevity even though it isn't, is a godly thing, but hearts do not follow logic. Rather than a clearly man-made low-quality texture spread across a flat surface, Snake's skin-tight sneaking suit exists. Though much harder to focus on, like phantoms in the night, the imagination fills the darkness, birthing detail precisely because there is none. It is simultaneously too complex and too obscure, mirroring the narrative. When I blast the settings to space, everything becomes so sterile and lifeless, like a child playing with plastic figurines, with the atmosphere to match. Suddenly, I'm being attacked on all sides, and forced to dive deeper in search of routes for striking. These old consoles were toothpick towers held together by huff-safe glue, the PS1's devotion to dithering as a means to mirage more colours, and its hatred of floating point values, aka scientific notation, causing all polygons to be assigned to whole integer pixels, which in turn causes that crazy wobbling it's so well known for, make them unsuitable for modern eyes. Both of these things can be fixed with emulation, but when we consider the developers of the time designed around them, are we making the game look better or worse by changing things? Are the wobbly polygons part of the PS1's unique charm like the crackle of a vinyl, the grain of a film reel, or a relic of a bygone age that we should drive through the streets towards swift and public execution? Does any of this matter if we aren't playing on a CRT? Or does it only matter because we aren't? With emulation, I'm given more power than ever, but not the knowledge to wield it. I haven't done any calculations, but I somehow don't think I'm alone in not being aware of the importance of floating point numbers and sub-pixel movements in polygon rendering when I was 5 years old. If anything didn't work, I just breathed on the CD and wiped it on my top, and I'm not much more knowledgeable today. Even if we are aware, we're still guessing at the true intentions of the developer. Zooming in with your binoculars to see enemies and door signs on low resolutions is bad to the A, but totally unnecessary upscaled. Is that intentional, or would the devs encourage the cleanliness? The gods can definitely see me, by the way. Within this single game, at one moment the aesthetic is strengthened by anabolic rendering and elsewhere corrupted by it. Personally, my enjoyment is intrinsically linked to the accuracy of this floor grate. The toy-like look I described earlier may not be the best fit for the realistic faces and military hardware of a gritty spy thriller, but it does fit kind of well for simply textured and brightly coloured 3D cartoon-like games. I think there were a couple of those in the 90s. The Final Fantasies are a great example of a game that I would argue is better off alone. Those pre-rendered backgrounds are gorgeous, but when you upscale only the 3D models, they become like an unintentionally hammered thumb. Incidentally, the Final Fantasy VII port does exactly that, except they also give you the option to speed up gameplay while retaining music speed, except they also filtered the backgrounds, except you can turn off random encounters, except the background music restarts from the beginning after every battle, except that got fixed 4 years later in an update. It's the best and worst way to play the game at the same time. 2D elements are another issue, as like pre-rendered backgrounds these retain their original look, Low-resolution FMVs, menus, text, and the original textures themselves all clash with the larger, smoother polygons. A lot of games have specific hacks, patches, and mods to deal with this, but that's what I'm getting at. Do we want a remastered experience, accepting we are subjectively messing with the visual aesthetic of the original, or do we want to be as accurate and authentic as possible even if that makes things look dated and weird? You need to understand so much about how the graphics of each console and game are presented just to begin to make a decision. If you finally decide you want anti-aliasing, do you want fast approximate, multi-sampling, or super sampling? And those aren't the only options. I have literally 27 tabs open right now. As we progress in hardware, the argument for upscaling becomes more and more positive, in consequence leaving ever less to say. The N64's sharp polygons look decent upscaled, but the abundance of stretched and bilinear interpolated, i.e. blurred, textures from its tiny texture memory almost leaves us in a place similar to pre-rendered backgrounds. UI aside, things look great in the 6th generation. Maybe in 10 years I'll feel differently, but there aren't nearly as many weird graphical workarounds that inspire repulsion through modern screens, becoming mostly a matter of art style. With cartoonish, especially cel-shaded, their intentionally flat textures and blocky lighting unsullied by extreme stretching, games taking the crown. Wind Waker, more like Mind Blower. 7th gen games in turn are definitized by augmentation, which probably explains why their ports and remasters flood modern consoles. In many cases, they were held back by the hardware of the time. The models are relatively high poly, and owing to increased file size, the textures are much more detailed than they looked, something which increased rendering resolution can give due admiration. The work done on RPCS3 is fascinating, and each controller holding experience is somehow better than even our most extreme collective rose tinting could make them. A lot of games of that generation have PC releases and ports that aren't unplayably broken, and on PC, more deep and greedy options to satisfy settings fiends are the standard. Returning to developer intentions, every game that isn't disguised robbery will automatically scale to your monitor size and aspect ratio. Half-Life is from 1998, and I've never questioned its authenticity. I have implicit faith in the almighty Valve. Why do I ceaselessly doubt my own mind when the choice is mine? Money and consumer hostility is the answer, and the question is, if standard modern PC games and free open source emulators created out of sheer passion can give us these options, why don't official re-releases and in-house emulators? For me, video games are the most complicated, beautiful, and fascinating things ever made, and learning about and discussing all their little quirks makes my heart flood with appreciation. I only baby scratched the diamond mine of emulation's graphical considerations. Integer scaling, linear filtering, intentional GBA washout, pixels on CRT versus LCD, all apples ripe for plucking. And that's before we get into things like audio, translations, and unique control systems like the DS and Wii. I'll instead offer thanks just for these emulators' existence, allowing us to experience masterpieces we couldn't otherwise, and their plethora settings that facilitate our each and every personal paradise. At the end of the day, these discussions are a lot of fun, but it isn't not obvious that this is all subjective. Everything on the spectrum of refusing to play Metal Gear Solid unless it's literally 1999, to refusing unless I can jack into it like the Matrix is valid as long as I'm enjoying myself. That's all that matters. Although DuckStation does recommend 1x resolution. Either way, if you're really obsessive, be prepared to spend a lot of time pondering games' minute graphical details instead of actually playing them. Wait a minute. As always, thank you for watching, and have a lovely day. Peace.